Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
You're set. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, it's so great to be live with you, Nate.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all your help and your patience, Patrick and Katie, walking me through StreamYard. I know that was a bit of a trial for you both.
Oh, we're happy to do it. This is going to be a fantastic triptych.
StreamYard. I know that was a bit of a trial.
Sorry.
Oh, we're happy to do it. This is going to be. Sorry about that.
We've got the feedback.
Forgot about that little time lag.
Yep.
Okay, who do we have here? Do we have people in the room?
We do, Nate. I see Peterson joining, and Karen Radford, and Kathy Biller, and Gabrielle Lish, and Elderly Poodle, and Michelle at Mermaid Cove. And I see Karen Radford, and so many other folks in the chat. Patrick, who are you seeing?
We've got our resident Canadian, got Julie from AJ's Retro and Vintage. New name I've not noticed before. Vicky Merle is here. We've got Chad coming in from the Terp State of Maryland. Steph sells stuff by the seashore is joined us. Norma Jean +1, so Jeannie coming in from the East Coast. And Moon Goddess Treasures and Mama J. We got the South represented by Tammy Renee Walker.
Awesome.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Lots of great folks in the chat tonight. And sorry if we missed anybody, but the chat does move rather fast. So welcome, welcome.
Great. I've started here on my Instagram page. I know a lot of you know that I collect English sterling silver. This is one of my favorite pieces. This is a taste vin wine taster, 1965 London. I love the snake handle on this particular one. But what I'd like to do today is run everyone through the basics of identifying and dating English sterling silver. So silver has been hallmarked and assayed in England right back to the beginning of the 14th century, sometime between 1300 and 1311. Not a lot of silver survives from that particular time. Some of the earliest hallmarks that you will actually find is from the middle of the 16th century. And that's probably because of the Reformation of the church around 1534, when a lot of ecclesiastical silver, a lot of silver was held by the Roman Catholic Church. And when Henry VIII decided to start the Church of England, a lot of that silver was confiscated and robbed and melted down for the crown. So we find that some of the earliest hallmarks we actually find are from London, and they're about 1544. So I'm going to start going through some of my many tabs here along the top. And we will start going through the process of identifying some silver hallmarks. But before we do, I want to show you this very brief video that is from the assay office in London. I hope that's coming through.
Yep,
we can see it, Nate.
Great.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I did not know they were using lasers to do silver
Yeah,
now.
it's
Oh,
amazing.
it's amazing.
And see how much the 3D laser marking looks
Oh,
exactly
wow.
like punch marking.
It's got
Now,
a
one of
lot
the
of great
questions and
detail.
comments coming in from the chat, Peterson was marking. So did you say when the earliest Hallmark? She says 1544.
That's right. I think the first now recorded ancient Hallmark is from 1544 from London. Although, as I said, the assaying of silver went right back to the beginning of the 14th century. Assaying of silver historically went back to the Byzantine Empire, so it's been around for a long time.
And
So
then when they assay the silver, that's like testing it, right?
That's right.
That's then always marked on the piece what the results are.
That's right. That is to guarantee that it is a sterling quality. Sterling is 925 parts per thousand of pure silver. The other 7.5% is usually copper. Sometimes it's a mixture of copper and zinc. And nowadays there is also germanium, which is a metalloid rather than a metal. It's on the periodic table. It has some anti-tarnishing qualities, so that is being used as an alloy too sometimes.
And we got a great question coming in from Mama J. She's asking, when did they start using the laser to hallmark silver?
That is reasonably recent. I think that was probably in the late 90s. I don't know exactly what the date is, but I think it is the late 90s, 95 to 99. I think they started doing the laser assaying.
And do they do any more of the stamps, or are they all now laser?
They still do both. They do the laser assaying works best when the item is completely finished, completely polished. But for some pieces, the assaying needs to be done at a certain point in the fabrication, as further steps in making whatever it's going to be would make the assaying difficult to use a punch. So you saw those beakers that were being assayed there. They were far from being finished, but the maker decided that that was the point that they wanted the assaying to be done so that they could remediate in essence, the damage, the pressure from the assay punch marks.
Fascinating.
You had mentioned, I know that we're going to be focusing on English silver. So you said that when they assay and they test it for the sterling, do they still mark it if it's not sterling? Is there anything other than 925 or sterling that they would mark?
There are other grades, but not in England.
Okay.
Sterling is the least pure grade. There is a higher grade called Britannia silver, and that, rather than having the lion passant, has a stamp of Britannia. And I do have a piece of Britannia standard on my page. This here is not sterling silver, it is Britannia. Here are the hallmarks here, and the little close-up shows that this replaces the lion passant, which would indicate sterling, and this indicates that it is 958 per thousand parts of pure silver.
Wow, I've never heard of that. That's really interesting.
No, I haven't either. I'm always learning something new.
Britannia silver is not often used.
And you said, what is Britannia again? 950?
958 per parts per thousand. It's not often used. Some really high-end makers will use it. This particular dish was made by Christopher Lawrence, who's a particularly well-known silversmith, and it was for an anniversary of the Bank of England, so that's why they chose the higher grade in this instance.
Now, does that make something like that more collectible because it's a higher grade that's not used very often?
Yeah, certainly. It is more collectible, and it's more valuable in its base material. It's more valuable. I've happened to, in my OCD days, one never being enough. I managed to find about 3 of these. So I have about 3 of these dishes in my collection.
Oh, how wonderful. Now, Gabrielle is asking, what was the first item that was hallmarked?
The first item that is dated from 1544 is a spoon. Again, coming after the religious Reformation and the loss of a lot of ecclesiastical silver, those families, those aristocratic families that still sided with the Roman Catholic Church, were often forfeited their family silver. So you find that spoons tend to survive because they could be secreted away, they could be hidden easily, and that tends to be why they are the oldest surviving items.
Great. Thank you, Nate.
Great. It's a great question. So let's go on. So there are several assay offices in England, and these are the hallmarks that are used by those assay offices. London, can you see that all right on the screen?
Beautiful.
Yep. So this is the leopard's head. It was earlier crowned leopard's head, but this is the current London hallmark. Edinburgh is a castle with 3 turrets. Birmingham is an anchor. Here, Chester office closed in 1964, sorry. And that is a wheat sheaf, 3 wheat sheaves with a sword. Dublin had this figure holding an olive branch. Sheffield, now this is the Tudor Rose of Sheffield. That's quite a modern assay office mark for them. Prior to that, they had a crown, and it was about 1975 they switched their assay office symbol from a crown to the Tudor Rose. Exeter is again 3 turrets of a castle, but quite different from the Edinburgh mark. Glasgow is a tree and a fish. Newcastle, again, 3 castle turrets, but quite different from Exeter and from Edinburgh. And if we go down a little further, I think, no, that's not what I expected. One moment. Here is the Sheffield mark. That's the crown before it changed to being the Tudor Rose. And you can see here, these are England, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Dublin. Also, Sheffield actually are the only assay offices that are still running to this day. And there's the Britannia 95.8 hallmark.
And just a clarification, Nate, we had a comment come in from Elderly Poodle talking about the intricate stamp markings, wishing they existed today. These, you just said, these do still get stamped silver for a piece even made today, correct?
They do. In 1979, there was some loosening of the legislation, which was part of England joining the European Union. So there was a scale hallmark that was introduced and could be used by English assay officers. But even to this day, they still use the same assay officers. They still use the date letters, even though they're not actually required to do that. They still use the lion passant, even though it would be just as easy for them to use a 925 hallmark. Some of these traditions are long held. So even though the legislation has changed, the assay officers have held on to their traditions.
And can you clarify the lion passant? That's the one that's standing up, correct?
No, this is the line passant here. These symbols arrive from heraldry. That's the use of symbols for aristocratic and noble families in England that would have a family coat of arms, they would have a family motto, they would have a family crest. And the lion is one of those emblems. So the lion passant is where the lion is standing on 3 legs and has 1 leg up. The lion rampant is where he is on his back legs with 2 legs up. And there's another third one which isn't used in hallmarking, the lion statent, which is where he has all 4 paws on the ground.
Oh, that's fascinating,
Excellent.
Nate.
All right, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
Now, how did you get started collecting silver?
I started probably just over 20 years ago. I come from a bit of a collecting family, and at that time, I was starting to earn quite good money. I had a lot of disposable income. I was a great fan of the English Antiques Roadshow, and I was basically looking for something to collect. And I decided on sterling because it has a fundamental value. Silver, it's a commodity. There was a big collector base. There was a lot of things of subcategories that you could collect. So that's why I decided on sterling, because I felt that it was a fun thing to collect and a good investment.
That's wonderful.
So what I might do is I'll close a few of these windows down as we go. Now, we've looked at those assay offices and their different marks. During the 1930s to 50s, it was very popular for silversmiths to create boxed sets of spoons that had articles of each of those assay offices. And I think I've just closed that tab down, unfortunately. Yep, I've gone a bit too fast. So this is the London Assay Office panel of hallmarks. And if we go down to the bottom here, we can see that here is the earliest known 1544 hallmark. So it's the lion passant, the crowned leopard's head, and the letter G, I think. G, yes. Is that coming through okay on your screen?
Yes.
It is very well, Nate.
So each of these years pass by and has a new date letter. Also, they start to change shape of the cartouche, the shape of the stamp that the letter is in, and the shape of the stamps of the lion passant and the crowned lion. And as we go through a little bit further, we start to see that here in 1784, there's an additional hallmark here, and that is a duty mark. In 1784, the Crown decided that they would take a duty on every piece of silver and gold that was hallmarked. And those marks stay right through Victoria's reign up until 1890, where there was no longer a duty paid on the assaying of sterling. So this panel here goes, as you can see, straight from the earliest known dates, 1544, right through to 2024.
Oh, wow.
And you can
is
see
fascinating.
that in addition to the lion passant, they've included the 925 hallmark, and they started to do that here in 1999. So what I'm going to do is go through a little bit of eye candy, some listings on eBay. I've tried to choose some interesting items, and we'll go back and we'll refer back to this panel to see if the vendor actually is selling the correct dated item.
We get to test them.
Yep,
Quick question regarding not the specific hallmarks, but for the hallmarking. Is there also a standard of where something would be hallmarked? Does it always go?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely there is. A chalice like this one would either be hallmarked on the bottom or on the top rim. A salver would usually be hallmarked in a straight line on the front or in a circular pattern on the back. A cream jug would be assayed along the top rim, as would a teapot. And the convention of where an item is assayed, where it's struck, those hallmarks are struck, actually helps discover fakes and forgeries, where people lift hallmarks from an older damaged piece and insert them into a newer piece to fraudulently trick buyers.
Interesting. Now, how many of those pieces that are forged do you run into on the collector's market?
Personally, I run into very few. It's an expensive business to forge something and to do it with any degree of success. So forgers will endeavor to fake items by really famous silversmiths like Paul Storr or Hester Bateman or Omar Ramsden. And those particular items are out of reach of the standard collector of silver. So those people who are spending large amounts of money would be doing their due diligence and would be much more suspicious about the things that they buy. There's just no money in forging something from the 18th or 19th century. There just simply is. It's not cost effective.
I see. Okay.
And a really quick question we missed when you were showing the chart, but Chrissy's Corner for Collectors is clarifying. It went all the way out to 2024. Is it still showing? Are we still using 4 marks, or are we up to 5 now?
That's the standard 4 marks
It's still
here.
4. Okay.
There would be a 5th mark that would indicate the maker.
Okay, but the traditional hallmarking, we're still only at 4.
That's right.
Okay, because you said the duty mark went away, but it was replaced by the 925. So okay,
that's right. And for those years, we had the 3 hallmarks, but now we had the addition of the 925, which backs up the line Passant.
So that's interesting too. So the 3 hallmarks. So 3 hallmarks would date between 1890 and 1998, and then also prior to the duty, which you said was what, 18?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, that starts in 1784.
1784. Okay.
Yeah.
So you either get something really, really old, or you have something that falls in the 50-year window.
Right.
Okay.
But it's almost instantly easy to determine which group it falls into, because all of these pre-1784 leopards have got crowns, whereas these ones haven't.
Oh, that's a great little thing to pay attention to.
So here we go. We've got a sterling silver traveling chalice. Ecclesiastical silver is very popular amongst collectors, unlike many other fields where religious iconography might not be overly popular. Collectors love this sort of thing. It's a beautiful chalice in its fitted case, which is probably why it stayed in such good condition.
I would imagine the fitted case helps it from tarnishing.
Absolutely. Absolutely it does. And if we get on a little bit further, here we go.
So is your house filled with fitted cases?
I do have quite a few things in fitted cases. I went through a slight fitted case fetish for a while.
Keep you having to polish it.
Yeah, true. So if I go onto this
now for value, and I don't know if you really have a way to compare the two, but say this exact same chalice was available without the carrying the fitted case, how much does that fitted case actually affect the value?
Oh, it could easily affect it between $50 and $100.
Oh wow, that really
is only $150 total, or 150 pounds total, right?
Yeah.
So like $200.
Certainly, yeah, and
wow,
again,
so half of its value. Wow.
Again, it depends on not only the bidder but the underbidder as to how much you want something. There are other things, there could be a chalice not in a fitted case that's by a more famous maker. It could be a chalice without a case that is from a rarer assay office or an earlier date. So it's hard to really compare, apples with apples sometimes.
Okay, wait a minute. How would a fitted case be tied to the assay office? How would you
know? If it was a chalice that was
gotcha.
At a different assay office. This is London. This has been going the longest. It's the largest assay office. If this was a small provincial assay office like Dumfries or York, it would be 4, 5, 6 times the price. So this particular vendor has this for sale. We can see that it's a capital D. The cartouche that it's in is a square cartouche with chamfered corners, and they say that it is 1939. So if we go to our panel and we look for 1939, we can see here that, yep, it is a square cartouche with chamfered corners, and it's the capital letter D.
And
It's amazing.
chamfered, is that rounded?
That's right. It's where they're squared off on the sides, on the edges. Sorry, the points.
It's amazing to me, Nate, how you can have some of these hallmarks with the same letter but a different cartouche, and how slightly different it changes the date.
That's right. And you can see also that London has certain letters that it omits. I don't think London has, it stops at U and then starts back at A.
So once they run through all of the letters, then they start again.
That's right. Yep. They start again. And you can see there seems to be often a convention where they will go from a capital letter to a lowercase letter to a capital letter to a lowercase letter.
So it alternates.
Not strictly, but it often does.
Okay.
You can see that between these here, they are still lowercase letters, but the indicator here from year to year changes that the assay office mark, the Leopard, is in a shield with a swag at the top, whereas here it's with a box with chamfered corners and a swag at the bottom.
Interesting. So do you need a jeweler's loop sometimes to see these marks?
Often you do. On larger pieces of silver, they will use larger hallmarks. And that is another good indication of a fake, where if you were to have a salver or a platter that's of a decent size, if it uses very small hallmarks, there's a good chance that they have actually been let in and are from an older piece.
Okay.
I wanted to go back to one of the comments you had made, that if this same chalice were assayed at a not outside of London, in one of the smaller places, is there a law of where it needs to be tested? Like, is it just the London silversmiths use London, and you'd go to the closest one? How did
you go to the closest one? It was a matter of pure transport. Although you find that there are some companies that are particularly prolific, might send certain items to the London assay office, but they might send other items to the Chester assay office, depending on when they wanted them returned. You know, you might be able to send an item to London and have to wait 3 weeks for it to be assayed and sent back to you, but the Chester office might be considerably less busy, and you might get that item back within a week.
Now, do some collectors strictly collect, say, London versus Chester, or is it just about really the date?
It's not even about the date particularly. It's about the item more than that. There would be people who would be very interested in provincial assay offices, but I doubt anyone would really collect specifically London pieces because they were from the London assay office.
Okay, great.
Now, Julia has a good question coming in from Perfecting Pearls. Are these marks always clearly distinguishable? So particularly when you showed that video that they're being hammered, stamped in, would there be times that it would be harder to read, or was that a requirement if they couldn't do it, would they stamp it again?
I don't, one item that they were stamping there was a tiny heart-shaped locket. Those hallmarks would definitely need a loop or a magnifying glass to be viewed. So the hallmarks, certainly the size of the hallmarks are dependent on the size of an item. Things like the one that's on the screen at the moment, at the moment, these are quite large, so the hallmarks are large and clear. But yes, a small item would have definitely small hallmarks.
If it doesn't stamp properly, would they have to do a secondary stamp, or like? if the letter just, if they're hammering it in, I mean, I've done that. Is it always legible, or is that just they're good enough they never made mistakes?
Well, you had to train for 7 years to be able to be licensed to be an assay office worker. So by that stage, you were pretty proficient and you wouldn't be making mistakes.
Excellent.
Now, these are interesting what you have, Nate, on the screen here, because I would have assumed that these are letter openers.
Yeah.
So they're actually poultry skewers.
A lot of these are sold as letter openers. You're quite right.
So sometimes if you were looking for this, would it be easier to find it under letter openers versus skewers? And would you get a better deal because the person doesn't really know what they are?
Yep, quite possibly. It's the same as I sometimes do when I've got searches for Wedgwood. I will deliberately do a search on Wedgwood spelt incorrectly with an E. And if someone is collecting poultry skewers or meat skewers, they might well have a search that's set up with keywords that would indicate letter openers because they'd know it was a skewer when they saw it.
Fascinating.
These are particularly nice. Georgian, so the vendor says that he believes them to be 1783. Great clear hallmarks here. So we've got a lion passant. We have the London crowned leopard. There's a maker's mark, which is a little bit indistinct next to that. But we've got a date letter, which is H, and a shield-shaped cartouche with a chamfered corner.
Now, these are in a different order. Are they allowed to do that?
It's unusual that they would be in this order. It is unusual because there is a convention of the order of them, but it's not, especially at this date, unusual to find things that are out of order in hallmarking.
Now, I'm noticing on these hallmarks here, and I just find this interesting, is the skewer that's on the bottom. The third hallmark in is a little bit crooked compared to the others. Now, does that make a difference in the collectability of it, or is that just how they're made?
No, that's a great question, but no, it wouldn't. At this time, we're looking at, I think it was 1783. You would have been working with much more rudimentary punches and hammers. That sort of skewed hallmark is quite accepted. These have got a long, flat surface. Some pieces of cutlery, like marrow scoops, have a quite short and narrow section that would be hallmarked. And the force of the hallmarking and the assaying would often splay and displace that silver. So when that item went back to the maker, they would actually have to refinish that item, which would obscure the hallmark somewhat.
Okay, that makes so much sense.
So let's go back to our panel and see what the English or the London Hallmark for 1783 actually looks like. I'm sorry, was it 1783? Yep, 1783.
Yeah, 1783.
It does that sometimes on these pages. Okay. Here we go, 1783. So it's the last year before the assay officers, the silversmiths had to start paying a duty. And indeed, it is an H in a shield-shaped cartouche.
So that person has dated their silver correctly.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, you've got on this one, you had shown that fourth hallmark was actually the maker's mark.
That's
How
right.
often is it that something will also have that, basically the extra touch mark of a maker?
Always. It would always have a maker's mark.
Okay. So when we were talking about 3 hallmarks versus 4, if you're adding the maker's mark, then you're talking about 4 versus 5.
Yeah. Well, it's
but they're not technically the hallmarks.
Yeah, that's right. You know, in essence, the maker's mark is a given. It's always there on everything. It's the amount of the other marks that really helps indicate age.
Gotcha.
This item bidding is ended, but it is a pair of grape shears, grape scissors. Let's see if I can go into the original listing. Another piece of Victorian cutlery that is for one use and pretty specialized. These are quite beautiful, these grape scissors. At a Victorian table, you would never reach and pluck a grape from a bunch of grapes. You would snip a section of grapes off and put them on a plate in front of you to eat.
Now, I'm sure that was something that was only done by the wealthy.
Indeed. Although the middle class would have these also, but they'd be more likely to be silver plated than sterling.
Okay. The metalwork on these are absolutely amazing.
This engraving is beautiful. It's delicate, and it really sort of brings out a wonderful design here. If we go through to the hallmarks, so here are the hallmarks here. So again, we have a London Hallmark. It's an uncrowned lion. It's in a shield with chamfered corners. The date letter is in a shield itself with a sort of a swag along the top. So if we look to 1891, here we go. So again, we have the Q and the same shape shield.
Now, I'm noticing on this piece, Nate, there is some markings that are on the bottom there that don't seem to be part of the hallmarks. Is that something that someone added later that devalues it?
That is vandalism. So someone has scratched something onto that particular piece at some stage. Sometimes you get a scratch weight of certain things, salvers, particularly large trays, which would help you indicate if some silver had been lost off it at some stage. But that just seems to me to be blatant vandalism.
It looks like a museum acquisition number.
Yeah, it certainly could be a collection number, but it is poorly engraved on a very conspicuous part of the item. It could have been actually engraved inside the snipping mechanism and not been visible.
Now, could someone polish this off, or would that actually damage the item more?
You could polish that off, but you would come to a stage where you would be polishing that hallmark down as well, and collectors do not like that.
I'm sure that the lion's crown on some of those hallmarks get polished off relatively easily.
They do. You can see that there is evidence of some polishing, some wearing to the lion passant. There's not quite the level of detail that it would have had when it was actually stamped. You can still see some of the details on the leopard's head face. But at this stage, when silver was polished, it was polished with quite an aggressive formula. So it would, in essence, take off tarnish, but it would also take off a very, very thin layer of silver every time you used it.
Judy Lyle came in with a question that I think it's apropos for this, but also overall. She is asking how you've come across all of this knowledge. Is this all self-study, or do you have any sort of training in anything about the silver and the care?
All of this material is so readily available online. It is very easy to teach yourself the basics of it. Shows like the television shows like the Antiques Roadshow would often show sterling silver items and have sort of introduction to hallmarks and showing you basics. But once I decided to start collecting silver, I just did my research myself.
And these websites are so helpful with the hallmarks listed on them.
Very helpful. There's a lot of information out there, not to mention the fact that the English hallmarking system is so trusted because it's so complete and robust.
They really did document everything.
They did. So let's go on to another item. This is a lovely piece, another communion. This is a communion set. Again, in a fitted case, 1883. At a good price too. This is pretty much exactly what these sorts of things go for. Okay, so here we go. So we can tell that this is in the reign of Victoria because it's got a Victoria duty mark on there, and it's got an H in a shield-shaped cartouche. So if we go, we're looking for 1883. 1883, Victoria duty mark, H in a shield.
Now, because this one is a set, would it affect the value? I would assume all three of these would have been assayed at the same time. Would it affect the value if you still had a set, but they were assayed differently?
There's certainly a year sort of a grace where items could be on the cusp of 1 year going to the next, which would be perfectly acceptable. If you'd found that you had these three pieces and one of them was from a different maker, that would lead you to believe that it had been a marriage of some sort at some time.
Now, you mentioned, I think a while ago to me, that a lot of the makers did combine and different things happen, sort of similar to the glass manufacturers. So is all of that really well documented as well?
Yeah, pretty well documented. Not every maker is documented. Gabrielle sent me some pics earlier today of a set of spoons, and it was easy enough to determine that they were hallmarked in Birmingham and the date letter was for 1936. I couldn't find that particular maker's mark. It's sure to be listed in the Birmingham Assay Office records, but they aren't available online.
So how would you get those records? And if they're not online, can anyone go to the office?
Yeah, you could absolutely. You can make an appointment to go and see it, or you could possibly ask one of their team to look for it for you. You'll find a lot of marks are online and shown, but simply not all of them.
Wonderful.
Okay. This is an interesting piece. Large pedestal fruit bowl, which it says is 1896. And if we go looking here, it's a lower A, which I know is 1896. What this particular piece shows is why I selected it, is this here. And I know people sort of tease me a little bit about my silver being polished and how they like the tarnish. But over time, tarnish turns to pitting. That's where this material is eaten away by salts in the air. And this is considered quite serious damage. You can even tell that at some stage, this was so heavily polished that all of the intricacies of the leopard face is gone. Collectors don't like this at all.
I'm sure that really devalues a piece.
Significantly.
So can I just clarify? So what you're saying, so they've over polished the outside and definitely see the detail is lost on the leopard face. But on the inside, are you saying it wasn't polished and that's what the pitting was caused by, or was the pitting caused by over polishing?
Well, what probably happened here is that all of it's been polished, but because it's a fruit bowl, probably some apples stayed in there for a couple of weeks and it wasn't cleaned properly. So when they came to actually polish this thing up, that they polished the inside and out, but because of this pitting inside and the damage, this is post-polishing inside and out.
Now I'm looking at the hallmark there, Nate, and it seems like that lion might have had a crown. Would that be correct?
No, this particular one, it wouldn't have a crown. No, that's just the shape of the cartouche, which is, so if we actually look at this particular hallmark, 1896, is it 1896? Let me just go back. 1896. So, no, that's a little bit ropey because there is no duty mark there. That is an A. So let's see if we can actually find this I think that this is more likely to actually be 1916.
There it is.
So not only is this
But those do
vendor
look
got,
very similar.
yeah,
Yeah.
not only has this vendor got a slightly substandard product, they have incorrectly identified the assay office year.
So
Oh no,
one
I'm
of the
sorry,
questions.
I take it back. It is 1896. There it is there. I don't know what I was looking at through here. 1896.
So it has the leopard with a shield, where the other one has the leopard with the square.
That's right.
Yep.
That's my
Okay. Yep.
mistake.
Now, Mama J threw in a comment, and it ties to what you had mentioned before we leave the fruit bowl about the fruit being acidic. I know that that's the same thing with sterling silver salt cellars, but typically a sterling silver salt is going to have a gold wash, vermeil or something going in it. Would that have happened with the sterling silver bowl, or would
Yes,
that have been sold as a fruit bowl? It's completely sterling silver.
it probably would, and it did look like it had the remains of a gilded interior, but the acidity and salt content would still have worked its way through that at some stage. After
I didn't know if that could
exposure.
be polished away as well.
It certainly could be polished, but you'd be polishing away the gold plating also. And by the look of the pitting on that, it was quite seriously tarnished and pitted inside. So this I selected not particularly because of its hallmarks. It does have hallmarks, but they're very indistinct and fuzzy in the picture. I included this because I have a sterling silver tracheotomy tube. I showed this in one of my early YouTube videos. I think mine was from 1936 or 38. And this is a good example where this incredibly small and light piece is totally worth the $309 that it's being asked for it, even though you could probably get a teapot or tankard for the same price. That there is enough interest in the market for medical oddities and small specialty pieces that this, and at this being quite a late date, makes this a very popular item.
Now, are these something that don't come up for sale that often?
This is the second one I've seen.
Oh, wow.
I fear I'm going very slowly through this. Sorry.
Oh, you're doing great, Nate.
So this is an early porringer. This is a ceremonial cup that could be filled with alcohol, or it could be filled with pap and used as an invalid's feeder. This is very typical of extremely early English silver marking decoration. And lovely set of hallmarks on the bottom. We've got a crowned leopard, lion passant, and this looks like a very stylized F in a Gothic font. And they say 1764. See if we can prove that. Here we go. There's that same very unusual I. It actually indicates an I.
It does look like an F, so I can see how you would think that.
But that's got a it's got a beautiful set of very clear hallmarks.
Now, is SM the maker's mark on that, or is the other mark that was engraved in the bottom, is that the maker's mark?
No, the SM would have been the maker's mark. The M engraving would have been the owner's engraving.
Okay.
Now, one of the questions, I apologize, it was earlier and I can't find it, but it made me think of it when you just talked about the detail of how that was done. So maybe in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century pieces, it may be less of an issue. But at what point do you feel about the selling of silver now? You know, I know in some cases things can get sold for their melted weight. The question had been, what is your opinion on selling silver in the market right now? Is how much of the value is going to be based on the artistic, design of the piece versus its intrinsic value as silver?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the intrinsic value of the weight of the silver is the bare minimum that that piece should be sold for or is worth to buy. And then it's pretty objective, pretty subjective after that. If you're collecting spoons like this one, for example, you will pay above the melt weight for it. And depending on the rarity or age of it is how much you will pay over and above that. I have no necessarily any problem with the melting of silver if it's damaged, if it's out of style. There's a lot of very sort of unimportant silver out there. It's sort of like jewelry in a way, where you might inherit a ring of some sort that you don't particularly like, but you could take the stones out and get the ring remodeled or turned into a pair of earrings or something like that. So I don't have any problem with people buying and selling silver for its scrap value.
Now, this piece is pretty amazing here. I'm looking at the engraving on it, and that is just fantastic.
This is very old. This is an ancient form of spoon. This is a Trafford spoon. You can see that's the description of the shape here at the end, at the finial. There is an engraved inscription on that is probably Victorian. But the fact that this is such an old spoon, I don't think that detracts too much from the value. It's got a lovely, still quite clear set of hallmarks, even though you can see that there's rubbing there on the leopard, the crowned leopard. You can register the distinction of the date letter also. They believe it to be 1683. And if we look at 1683, indeed, you can see the similarities are unmistakable to that date letter.
Now, you had mentioned that because it has initials engraved into it, because of its age, it probably doesn't have a huge impact. But if we're dealing with, say, a 20th century piece that has someone's initials engraved, how much will that have an impact on resale value?
An enormous impact. You would say that a spoon from the 20th or late 19th century that had a personalized initial engraved on it would be worth scrap value.
Okay.
Now, is there a reason that the collectors do not care for the engraving in it?
It's just because they're not their initials, and it seems to mar a piece. I've got some examples of good engraving versus not so good engraving that I can show you. But as a rule, collectors just simply don't want pieces that have got other people's engraved initials on them.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so that is all the English examples. I do actually have a whole series of Birmingham examples as well, which I'll go through quite quickly. I don't really want to bore people too much with all of this.
I don't think anyone's being bored.
No,
everyone seems to be very engaged.
Great. So the next 4 tabs, I have examples of what are called or known as castle tops. These are usually vinaigrettes or snuff boxes. Sometimes they're cigarette cases. Sometimes they're calling card cases. These 4 are all vinaigrettes. And they were all hallmarked in Birmingham, made by different people. And a castle top is simply a architectural cast design on the top of a box. They can usually, what dictates the value of these is the maker, and this particular one is Nathaniel Mills. He is considered to be the best maker. The next thing that can affect the value is if it is a rare building.
Nate, I'm sorry, can we interrupt for a second because Carrie is coming up with a valid question. Can you describe what a vinaigrette box is?
Oh, sure. That's a great question. I should have mentioned that. You've got to imagine that at this time there were open sewers in the streets of London and Birmingham. The people were unwashed. Everything smelt thoroughly awful. And if you were an aristocrat or a nobleman or of a wealthy family and you were having to travel through the streets, when that smell, that stench became unbearable, you would bring out your vinaigrette, which would have inside a small sponge or piece of fabric soaked in perfume, and you would hold it up to your nose so that you had a few seconds of relief from the stench of the masses.
Now, I've always heard that people that went to the Globe Theater, especially the wealthy, would actually use oranges on their noses. But would this be something that they would more likely use than the oranges?
Well, I suppose if you were sort of middle to lower class, you might use an orange. If you were middle-ish to upper class, you might have a silver-plated vinaigrette. If you were upper class, you would have a sterling one. And if you were an aristocrat or nobility, you would have probably a castle top, like these examples.
These are absolutely spectacular, Nate.
Can you show the open box again? Because I didn't look. Are they repoussé or no? They're not.
So
how
this
is that castle top formed? Is it hammered in or molded?
That's a casting.
It's cast. Okay.
That's a cast piece, and they'd be assembled with this ornate grill. Sometimes the grills are plain. Sometimes they're very ornate, very beautiful. They're gilt. You can see there's a little latch there that you would get your fingernail under to put in the piece of perfumed sponge or fabric.
So you're saying the vinaigrette box itself would be cast. I was talking about the castle top.
The top would be cast, and the rest of it would be manufactured from sheet silver.
Gotcha.
I have a reproduction of a castle top in my collection. It's from the 1970s. Here we go, right here.
And anyone who's not following Nate's Instagram, you need to do
absolutely.
Something.
He's got the most curated feed. It's just amazing.
So this is from 1975, and it depicts Windsor Castle. It's particularly beautiful. It was not cheap. Even though it wasn't as expensive as the earlier examples, and this is a reproduction, it certainly wasn't a cheap piece. One of my favorites.
These types of reproductions do have a pretty good value as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Certainly it is a favorite. So I will get rid of some of these tabs here and we'll move on. This is the Chester Hallmarks. I actually came through a really strange realization when I was doing research for this. I think it sort of speaks to the fact that you're always learning about things. As I said, when dating things, you look at the date letters, the shape of the cartouche. That's the hallmark to indicate when something was hallmarked. And I came across something that was a little bit odd. All of these Chester pieces, this is a maker, Samson Morden, an extremely well thought of maker, and this is a Novelty fish pincushion. Again, almost no weight of silver whatsoever. It's a novelty item that sort of would be attractive to collectors of sewing items, and that's reflected in this quite enormous price here, $680 US. If we go and have a look at the hallmarks here.
So silver pieces can be collected not only by silver collectors, but also, say, someone that collects pincushions or collects vinaigrettes.
Yep, certainly, or thimbles, Vesta cases. where a lot of them are in sterling. There are a lot in brass.
Interesting.
So this here has even got a registered mark for it. They've registered this design, and you can see that it is, I think this is either an H or a K for the Chester office, and they say it is 1908. But the problem comes that I discovered, here's the 1908 mark in the book, in the online resource. I've looked at every online resource I could find. I've looked at the several books that I have detailing hallmarks. Excuse me. And all of them have incorrectly identified this shape as having a swag on the bottom, where you can clearly see that there is no swag.
Oh, wow. No, there isn't.
This is something I've never noticed before. I know these are true items, quite convinced of it, but I don't know why there is this consistent error in Chester hallmarking panels.
Is there any type of way to bring the attention of this to someone that runs those websites, or is it really impossible?
Well, all of the websites share the same misinformation. I think that you could make inquiries of the Assayers Guild in England. I'm going to take it to one of my friends who is quite an expert and see what they have to say about it. Excuse me. These are particularly beautiful. These are place card holders in sterling with a hunting theme: horses, rabbits, dogs, elk, big deer, sorry. And again, you can quite clearly see that the date letter has a cartouche that's shaped without a swag on the bottom. And it's this sort of upturned N, I think it is. Let's see what 1938 it says. There we go. And again, it's shown with this distinct swag. So it's quite interesting. You do learn something new every day. I put this one up because I thought it was a monstrosity. I thought at first that this was some sort of marriage between two items. They just seemed so incongruous to me. After looking at it a little bit, and you can see how poorly the lid fits to the base. Yeah. But after a little bit of examination, I think they probably are together. The shape of the top and the shape of the bottom is too close, even though it's poor fitting, that I think that they are made like this, but I think it's pretty diabolical.
It's a very interesting piece.
Yeah, not to my taste at all. This is a lovely little sedan chair. Again, Sampson Morden. What I find interesting about this is the person who photographed this has put these removable carriers upside down and on the wrong side. So you can see that the hallmarks are actually upside down.
Of course, I'm sure that can be fixed when the buyer gets that.
That's right. Quite right. I'm going to go past this. Again, more place card holders. Market loves these. These have a little enameled fly fishers lures on them. Again, the market just loves this sort of small piece of silver.
And do you find that's a good price for the 4 of those?
I think it's very high, but I think that it's one of those prices that you will actually find someone who will pay that one day. Again, this is a wine label. I have a series of these myself. Sampson Morden. Extremely basic and plain, but it's the name of the maker here that dictates this high price. If this was a lesser maker, you could probably get 2 or 3 prettier labels for that same price.
Now, we've got a great question coming in from Marianne. She says, silly question. How does one set a price for selling? Do we use the current troy ounce for $9.25, or is there a method of percentage?
If you had silver that you wanted to price, I would go onto an online resource, try and find the nearest possible item and price it according to that. Certainly do weigh it to ensure that you're not selling it for below scrap value.
Great answer, Nate.
Thanks. Now, these are odd hallmarks, commemorative hallmarks that can be added to the standard assay office date letters, and they're about special occurrences. There's a 1935 Jubilee for King George, coronation mark of Elizabeth II, her Jubilee at 77, and a Millennium Hallmark. So these are hallmarks that can be unexpected, that can show up on certain pieces in these years.
And do those affect value when you see those?
You know, certain collectors really like them and may pay a little bit more of a premium to find them, but as a rule, not hugely. Now, this is that hallmark, the 5253. It's basically for the coronation, but it can span over 1952-53. Elizabeth came to the throne in 1952, but didn't have a coronation until 1953. That was a period of mourning for her father. And again, this is a 1934 example. So it's the 34-35 special hallmark.
Now, you talked about earlier where they would put certain hallmarks to assure that you were getting some type of authenticated piece and that they had consistency. So is that a hallmarked area where they've had that on the picture? Is that something you typically see for that type of item?
That's right. That's exactly where that sort of item would be hallmarked. Do we still have Patrick? I haven't heard from Patrick in a while.
Yep, I'm here. I'm just engaged. I'm just totally engrossed.
Great. Again, this is the 1977 Jubilee Hallmark. That's an extremely well-struck set of hallmarks showing the Sheffield new hallmark of the Tudor Rose rather than the crown. This is made by Francis Howard. He's a particularly well-respected silversmith who makes very faithful reproductions of older pieces.
Those hallmarks are so clear.
Extremely clear on that item. Here we go. This is an example of the Millennium Hallmark on this particular spoon. Hope you can see it right in the middle there. This is an unusual position for hallmarks on spoons, but for occasions, special occasions like that, it's an acceptable variance on the standard where it really would be on the back of the handle of the spoon. And this is the 2002 Golden Jubilee mark. In this instance, there is no date letter. So this was after the convention where date letters were optional.
But it was only issued for that 1 year for her Golden Jubilee. So it kind of was.
That's right.
It was kind of a date letter by itself. It just wasn't a letter.
Exactly. Which in essence, makes the date letter somewhat redundant.
That makes sense.
I included this because, again, it's Sampson Morden, which is such a good maker. This here is described as Cavalier Dish. I included this because I have a pair of these dishes. Here they are here. They came in a pair as the Cavalier and the Puritan, or Oliver Cromwell and Charles I. These are cast rather than being stamped out of thin shim. They're very weighty. They're extremely well cast. I'm not sure what I paid for these so long ago. I'm pretty sure that the vendor didn't know that they were Sampson Morden or didn't know who that was. So I'm sure I got quite a good price. I couldn't find comparable pieces online anywhere. I could only find half of the set being the Cavalier, and it's got a very high price here, $303 for the single one. It's certainly quite beautiful, but sad to see it without its partner.
So would someone pick that up even if they didn't have the other mate?
Certainly, you might not even know that it was part of a pair. Certainly, there's very little evidence out there that would lead you to believe that there was a pair if you even tried to search for it.
That is really interesting.
Now, what do we move on to here? This is a little bit of a section where I know people have talked about and asked about personalized engraving on pieces and when that's good and when that's not quite so good. Probably the bottom of the list would be personalized engraving that had been removed. And that's usually done by polishing it out, or it can be done, excuse me, it can be done by a method called flooding, where silver solder is flooded over the engraved piece. And let's just know, I'm sure I've got an example of flooding here. If I can just show you. Nope. Now, this is a Vesta case here. And the seller says it has a vacant cartouche, but you can quite obviously see the shadow of where an engraved initial was on that before that has been attempted to be removed with flooding. It almost always shows some residue, some evidence. So this would be pretty much at the bottom of the pile of personalized engraving. That's when it's removed.
Now, why would people try to remove the engraving? Is it simply so they could put their own in it?
That's a good question. For a number of reasons, yes. So because the market doesn't like engraved initials. When you, if you were a noble family and you were having to sell off your family silver, you would probably want to have your family crest or motto removed from that piece, so people didn't know that you'd fallen on hard times and had to sell the family silver off.
Oh, okay.
Again, this is not particularly desirable. This is the personalized initials. That would be the sort of next step up. This is interesting. Sorry,
Nate,
Patrick?
we just had a quick question that Gina Marie was just asking for clarification on specifically how or what is flooding or how it was done.
Well, when you are soldering pieces of silver together, you use what's called silver solder. It comes in 3 grades. It comes in hard, medium, and soft. If you're soldering several different pieces onto an item at different times, you would start with hard solder, so that when you went to do the next piece of soldering on, you would use a medium silver, which wouldn't remelt the hard silver because it melts at a lower temperature. And again, you would use a soft solder to attach that third piece so that your first 2 pieces wouldn't actually come off and the solder wouldn't melt and give. So what they've done there is they've used a soft solder, they've heated it to a melting point and allowed that to run into the valley and channel of the engraved initials.
Excellent. Thanks for that explanation.
Great. So this is where you come into armorial designs that are military inscriptions. This tankard here, it's a beautiful piece. It is an absolutely beautiful piece. What makes it special is these military engravings on each side. It does have a dedication. If the piece had just the dedication, it would probably affect the value slightly. It is a military inscription, which is better than most. But the fact that it has these lovely military engravings on there, lifts it, and again is probably worth every bit of £525. Every bit of what does that make that? Almost oh, that's actually translated into Australian dollars. I'm not sure, sorry, what that is in American dollars.
Is
So
there
that's
a
one of
way?
the exception to the rule then when it comes to personalized engravings.
Yeah, that is a perfect exception to the rule. Again, this is another exception to the rule.
Before we move on from that, because I wanted to talk about that engraving, is there a way to know, or is there anything at the time it's being tested, is there a way to know if engravings are added after the piece was produced?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. If you, what would probably indicate that would be if you had a Georgian piece of silver that had an engraving that was so sharp and so clear, you would probably be suspicious of that.
Okay.
Because an engraving, like all pieces of the silver, would soften and wear with polishing and age.
Thank you.
This is a quaish or a quake. This is a Scottish ceremonial drinking cup. This has a dedication here that it was made for Joseph Hutton, who is a freeman. And this is another indication, another example of when there are exceptions to every rule. The fact that it was made by Omar Ramsden, a lot of his pieces would have Omar Ramsden me fecit, which means Omar Ramsden made me. He is one of the highest collected silversmiths out there. Every silver collector wants a piece by Omar Ramsden.
Now, do you have any pieces by Omar Ramsden in your collection, Nate?
I do not. I do not, but I wish I did. So I'm going to go back to something that I posted for this particular talk. I sort of try and make every effort to take good photos for my Instagram, but I sort of failed somewhat with these pieces.
It's hard because they're so reflective.
They're incredibly reflective. It makes it very difficult. You can see me in the reflection in my navy t-shirt. What makes this a good personalized engraving over a bad one? This is a family crest. This is a ducal coronet, so it's a coronet of a duke. This, I think, could possibly be the Yates family. I'm not 100% sure. It's a particularly fine engraving. This one here, again, this is a family crest. Awful photo. Absolutely awful photo. This one's not quite as good because it has this complicated nesting of letters over letters, which is very common in Victorian times. But I thought the family crest was nice enough to make an exception for this particular piece. Regimental silver, as I said, engraving was very popular, is really liked by the market. You can see regimental silver, like this particular piece, where they have the signatures of those officers in the regiment. Most commonly, almost every example will have a dedicated inscription for a retirement or for a wedding. This particular they took an offer of 700 over. Full price was 750. They've taken an offer. Here's another one here. I've logged into Invaluable, and this did sell for £1,000. It again has the facsimile signatures engraved into it, but it hasn't dedication for a marriage on there. What makes mine kind of different is that it has no dedication. This would have been used in the officers' mess of the officers' club of the King's Own Scottish Borderers. So this makes this piece quite a rare find.
That is absolutely amazing, Nate.
It needs a clean. Let's see, what else have we got here? Again, this is an example of good engraving. This is a family motto. Diligence and Honor, or Diligence Through Honor. That's a cover for a Matchbox. And even though it has these initials on the back, they can be forgiven for the lovely engraved personalization on the front.
That engraving is really lovely.
Again, this is another example of good engraving. That's another family crest. Another military one, good engraving. We've gone through this here. Coming here is something that I'm really interested in. This is what's called a duty dodger. And we showed back on the panel for London those years when a duty would be paid to the Crown on every piece that was assayed. There were a couple of sneaky makers who would stamp their own maker's mark several times so it would look like it had been assayed, but in essence, they dodged the duty.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of collectors really love this. Some collectors don't like it. They think it's sort of illegal, which it basically is. But this is particularly beautiful. I'm not sure if you can really make that out very well, but that's his own maker's mark stamped 4 times. I think it's IH.
So is there any laws on selling this then?
Sell one that's not been retested.
Well, it's a very serious crime in England. You would probably get a huge fine. There was a faker of English pieces a while ago that wasn't converting pieces, but had made his own set of hallmarks and was basically getting new things made and giving them old hallmarks. And he went to jail. I think he went to jail for 10 years.
Wow.
Oh.
So they really take it seriously. Again, another converted jug, but you get to the point where you will see this as a jug and you will know that started life as a tankard.
Now, do they all have the LAO mark on the bottom?
The LAO mark is the London Assay Office. If it was done at the London Assay Office, that would be the mark that they would give it. If it was done at the Birmingham one, it would be a different mark.
Okay.
So Peterson's asking a good clarification question. So she's saying, so selling a silver piece after alterations is illegal. It's not that it's illegal. It would have to be retested after it's been altered, right?
That's right. That piece of alteration would have to be tested and to make the whole thing legal again.
So in the case of the, like this jug or the example of that video, so say this tankard would have had the 1766 set of hallmarks on there. It's been modified, whatever, to add that spout. When they retest, they're testing the spout. Does the spout get a new set of hallmarks, or does the entire piece get a new set of hallmarks?
The spout would probably be hallmarked, and the old 1766 hallmarks, which would be on the base of this piece, would be struck out as shown.
Like that big charger was. Okay.
That's right.
Now, if you found this piece and for a novice that didn't know anything and they tried to sell it, would they get into some kind of trouble if it was just simply a case of being totally confused?
If there was no malice intended in the sale, I'm sure they wouldn't get into trouble. The piece would certainly still have to go to the assay office to be retested and the hallmarks changed. But if it was a genuine mistake, I doubt that that person would get into any trouble over it.
Great.
This is a really interesting set that's described here as English sterling silver, 12 bread and butter plates, 6 inches, English, late 1800s. Let me just find a good photo. Oh, there we go. Can we see those hallmarks there?
Yes.
Yes.
So you can see that there's an anchor in the middle and there's a lion to the side of it. I wish there was a clearer one. Here we go. And a Gothic C. that might lead you to believe that that's a Birmingham piece of sterling, an English piece of Birmingham assay office sterling. It's not. This is the Gorham Manufacturing Company. That's an American company that decided to use these particular hallmarks of the anchor and the lion. It's a well-respected firm. The reasoning behind them choosing this particular set of images for their hallmarks is a little bit on the ropey side. It's a little bit dodgy, but it's a good maker. There are pieces of Gorham silver in the White House. And you can also see, interestingly enough, that the vendor made a change after describing them as English Birmingham. They've added a note that said these are Gorham.
Now, it's interesting they didn't fix the listing title.
Interesting.
You actually can't. Once an auction starts, you're not allowed to change anything you posted.
That's interesting. I wasn't
sense.
sure about that or not.
Yeah.
But they did make the recognition that it is Gorham and not Birmingham.
Probably because somebody in the auction recognized there's 16 watchers. Somebody probably told them that's not what this is, but they couldn't change the listing without taking the auction down. So
quite probably. And $305 for a set of 6 bread and butter plates is not a bad price. It really isn't. And I'm just not surprised that it's actually got 2 bids on this. Now we're coming to the end. I know this has been an hour and a half. Sorry, people.
Oh, it has been fascinating, Nate. Don't apologize.
Yep, everyone's loving it.
I have included these last few pieces here. William Adams, Birmingham, 1976. You can see these marks here. WA, William Adams and Birmingham, 1926. That's not a true piece. Again, Birmingham, WA. I only show these out of my own personal pride. William Adams was my great uncle, my paternal great uncle.
Oh, Nate, that's amazing.
And we didn't get any of the silver come down through our particular line of the family. So whenever I see it, I like to buy it to collect a few pieces. I've given a few pieces to my mother, to my brother, and I have a few in my own collection.
Very cool.
And lastly, I know people ask about what I use to clean my silver all the time, and I use Haggerty's silver foam. I'm not being paid for this plug.
He's open to sponsors, but we do not have one yet.
This is by far the best product I've ever found. It removes tarnish by a chemical process rather than an abrasive process. So it's exceptionally gentle on pieces. It is simply like washing an item rather than polishing it.
So you really don't have to scrub with this at all, which is just absolutely lovely.
Not at all. And I know you've been turned on to this, that you like this product as well, Katie.
I do. Nate got me into this because I asked him what he uses to clean his silver. And I have a few silver pieces that were passed down through family. And this just has been a real game changer.
I just don't do silver. I bring in pewter and just don't polish it.
Yeah, right.
I don't believe I have a single piece of silver in my house.
Well, that is the end. Thank you, everyone, for coming to my TED Talk. Thank you for putting up with me for an hour and a half. I've become quite hoarse now for talking for so long.
Better than a TED Talk. It was a Nate Talk.
Yes, it was. A very special Nate.
Any other questions that have come up in the last few moments?
There was one, and you had somewhat referenced at least one piece in passing, but the question would be, what are you on the lookout for? So you mentioned you don't have a piece of Omar Ramsden, and then you also mentioned the Adams family connection. Is there a unicorn, like your great white whale? What are you looking to add to your collection?
Well, I have a collection of marrow scoops. Again, one of those useless single service item that the Victorians liked. I have a collection of about a dozen of them. What I would like, my unicorn item would be a Duty Dodger marrow scoop.
Now, how easy are those to find where you are versus the United States?
Well, when I did the research for this to search for duty dodgers, I found those two pieces. I've not found any other pieces, and I've found no marrow scoops. But I do like my collection of marrow scoops. I might photograph them at some stage for my Instagram.
That would be wonderful.
Oh, my screen just went a bit crazy there. Yeah, doesn't like that. Okay. Well, thank you for coming along. Oh, actually, the one last thing that I was going to show was some more exceptions to the rules of engraving. This little cigarette case with this charming little Betty on it. I thought, yep, I'm going to have that. That's lovely.
That is beautiful.
This little engraved cartouche has a couple of frolicking goats, which I thought was charming on this Vesta case. This is a family crest of some sort, and it depicts a crowned phoenix rising from the flames of this castle. This is Rothesay. So this is a coat of arms for the town of Rothesay, which is on the Isle of Bute. And one of my favorites is this little cigarette case. This is a bit battered. This is the RASC. That's the Royal Army Service Corps. They became the Royal Service Corps in 1918. This is from 1919. This is the time when women first went into the workplace because their husbands were at war, and when women joined the war effort. So the RASC was the Service Corps took ammunitions and food and medical supplies to the front line. Mount Coy was a place which was one of the bases of the RASC. I find it particularly interesting that they referred to themselves as the Fragments.
That is incredible, Nate.
So again, it almost counters every reasoning for not wanting personalized engravings, but it's that exception that I just had to have this piece.
Just beautiful. And again, guys, if you're not following Nate on Instagram, you really should be, because he's got one of the most curated Instagrams, and his photos are just gorgeous. And there's always so many different pieces of eye candy to see.
Yep. Beautiful.
Well, that's all. Thank you, everyone, for coming along and putting up with me for an hour and a half. I've really enjoyed sharing my collection and my limited knowledge on the subject.
Well, you're getting lots of standing ovations, Nate, in the chat. People have absolutely loved this triptych.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thanks, guys.
Nate. Thanks for telling tales.
Thank you. We'll see you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye, friends.
Bye, everyone.